As he was twirling Maya in the air, James noticed Adam along with Kate and Peter. Putting Maya down, James said, "Finally, I was wondering how much longer it would be until all of you were finished." James looked at each of their armor and weapon selections. Based on how they looked, they had chosen similar to James to focus more on defense. Maya was the only one that chose something more offense-centered. Adam still stuck to a bludgeoning weapon, though the mace he was carrying had short spikes coming out of it. It kind of looked like a mix between a hammer and a bat. His armor didn't have any metal, but he had thick leather protecting vital areas. There was also some kind of dense material, likely from a monster that would take the place of metal. It'll help when he gets close to the enemy, but won't be heavy enough for when he needs to get away. Metal would likely be too heavy, even if it was more durable, James thought to himself. James' eyes looked at Kate, who looked far bulkier than what Sam had chosen. If Sam looked like a knight, then Kate was a tank. The only way that he knew that it was Kate was because of her visible red hair. Her face was covered by a visor similar to what Sam had. Her armor gave an impression of a monster that was entirely clad in metal. It even made her look taller, possibly even taller than him. "Are you going to be okay in that?" Maya asked Kate, beating James to asking the question. Laughing, Peter put a hand on Kate's shoulder. "That's the same thing I asked, and I feel like she'll sink into the ground because of everything she's carrying." It was at that moment that James realized what Kate was carrying on her shoulders. They were two large shields, like the kind she typically used. The shields blended so well with the rest of the armor that James didn't notice what they were initially. There were also two large swords at Kate's waist, the blades coming out several feet behind her. "I feel sorry for the monster that has to go up against you," Celine said, her eyes wide in surprise. She looked at Sam and compared the armor the two were wearing. Sam laughed. "I don't think I'd be able to use such an armor. I suspect the reason why I selected that was to be able to absorb all of the monster's attack instead of your team." Kate raised her heavily gauntleted hand and lifted her visor. She had a large grin on her face due to how they all reacted. Surprisingly, Kate wasn't sweating from carrying all the weight. "It's actually not that heavy. Having to carry around the one shield felt a lot worse, likely because I was always off balance. But this makes me more centered," Kate said. "I bet I'd barely have moved if those rock bears had taken a swipe at me." "Can you believe that she has two more of those swords attached to her pack?" Peter pointed at the two swords on Kate's waist. A chuckle was heard before Mim commented, "If you're able to travel long distances wearing such armor, I suspect that it'll help you in the long run." James looked to see Mim and Naylor walking up to them. Though he had a bow and arrow as his primary weapons, Mim also had several crossbows on his waist. This was in addition to a short sword. Seeing the weapons that Mim had selected, James had a feeling that he was going to be closer to the monsters compared to Maya. Reflecting Mim's likely combat style in the future was how the armor covered most of his body in leather, with metal plates reinforcing specific areas